Tonight, we follow the quiet path of Jon Snow. His tale winds from Winterfell's cold courtyards to the far reaches of icy wilderness, carrying threads of honor, love, and loss. As you listen, let each turn settle you gently into rest. Chapter 1. Winterfell, the Bastard Son. Winterfell rests in the north like an old, steady heartbeat, and Jon Snow grows up inside that rhythm. Stone courtyards hold the day's chill. Kitchens hum with low warmth. The godswood breathes a slower time beneath red leaves and patient snow. Jon belongs to all of it and to none of it at once. He is Lord Eddard Stark's son, yet not Lady Catelyn's child, and that truth follows him the way a shadow keeps pace at noon. He learns to tuck away questions, to listen first, to let silence do part of the speaking. He is not unloved, only fitted awkwardly at the edges of the Stark circle. Robb treats him like a brother because they learned the same halls, the same hard winters, the same rules, spoken and unspoken. Arya runs wild at his side, elbows skinned and spirit bright. She recognizes a rebel's quiet in him, the way birds catch each other's movement in the air. Sansa is polite, careful, proper in the way lessons teach, and her courtesy sometimes feels like distance, even when she means none. Bran and Rickon are younger, all questions and sudden laughter, and Jon helps them balance before the world asks them to choose a stance. Lady Catelyn draws a boundary as clean as a frost line. She does not strike, does not shout. She simply looks past him with a gentleness that keeps its distance. A hallway can become a small sea in that glance. Jon learns to turn aside without bitterness, because bitterness is a companion that bites the hand that feeds it. At night, he lies awake and listens to Winterfell breathe. The kettles, the hearths, the quiet gossip of wind around stone, and he promises himself to be useful, to build belonging with his hands, if not with his name. In the training yard, Sir Rodrik Cassel is winter in whiskers and wool. He values balance over flourish, and Jon listens as if each correction were a coal worth saving. Robb enjoys the clash, the friendly contest, the ring of wood, and the grin after a good feint. Jon loves the moment soon as breath turns into motion, the choice that becomes a cut or a parry. Boots whisper on packed snow, leather stretches, wooden blades knock and skid. Praise given rarely warms like good soup. Jon files each lesson carefully until his feet begin to remember before he does. Maester Luwin keeps ravens, ink, and patient answers. Jon brings him questions that don't quite fit in a ledger. What is honor when feeling and duty pull apart? What makes a father besides blood? How far a word like bastard should reach? The Maester draws maps, explains laws, sets history beside habit, and shows how stories become weather that wears at stone until shapes change. Jon learns that the North is not only a place, but a promise, and that promises have their own seasons. Spring in hope, winter in keeping. When words get heavy, Jon goes to the godswood. The heart tree's carved face looks older than memory, and the pool beneath it gathers the sky even on clouded days. Here, no one asks his name. He kneels without petitions, grateful for a quiet that accepts him as one more breath beneath red leaves. There are days he imagines the tree listening. There are days he imagines nothing at all, and that too is mercy. Ghost settles near, white as new snow, red eyes calm, the soft rasp of his breath a simple proof of company. Ghost arrives as the runt and the exception. The day the pups were found, the great she-wolf lay dead with a broken antler in her throat, an omen adults read in furrowed silence. The children learned a different lesson. Sorrow sometimes carries gifts wrapped in its folds. 5 pups for 5 true-born Starks, and then a 6th. nearly overlooked because he made no sound. Jon lifted the pale bundle, felt a hammering heart smaller than his palm, and knew without thinking that quiet can still be fierce. The wolf who never barks becomes Jon's truest mirror, watchful, loyal, and apart. Theon Greyjoy laughs too easily and wears bravado like a bright cloak against cold. He teases everyone, Jon included, and the jokes glance away like sleet on good wool. Jon sees the seam behind the swagger, the ache of a boy far from home hardening himself into charm. In that they share a private kinship. Both live within Winterfell's walls and know the stone, yet both understand that the bedrock belongs to other names. The castle is a hearth they may warm their hands at. It is not a surname they can rest beneath. Ned Stark moves with the steadiness of a man who believes roots matter. Jon loves him without bargaining, because love that asks for proof does not hold long through winter, and yet there is a veil between them, thin and constant, woven from a story Ned does not tell. If Jon asks about his mother, the answer is a gentle refusal shaped like care. So Jon builds with what is given: practice, patience, duty, and the careful hope that one day a door will open. Honor, he sees, is not a medal, but a habit. Small choices repeated until they become a path. Feasts place bright coals in the cold. Meat steams. Candles float small moons along the table. And music turns the hall warmer by degree. Jon sits below the high table not because anyone pushes him there, but because he understands the architecture of names. From that vantage, he can watch his father's quiet smile, Robb's easy laughter, Arya's restless legs, Sansa's perfect posture, Bran's attentive eyes. The warmth reaches him and steadies him. When the air grows close, he steps into the yard where stars sharpen, and his breath smokes like a thought you can finally see. One night outside, he meets a traveler who looks at him without pity or mockery. Tyrion Lannister is small in body and large in mind, and he speaks as if titles were garments people wear for weather, not definitions of bone. They share a drink and a conversation that asks no pretending. It is brief, like two campfires glimpsed across darkness, but it lingers. Jon returns to the hall feeling taller, as if someone adjusted a picture frame inside him until it hung level. Ghost noses his fingers. The yard seems less wide. King Robert arrives like a Thor. Banners, trumpets, dust, a fast, bright energy that slips into every corner of the keep. Jon admires the pageantry from a courteous step back. Winterfell looks noble when it fills with visitors. Stone appears to straighten its shoulders under royal gaze. Still, the invisible boundary between bastard and high table holds steady. Jon does not resent it. He reads it as weather. Useful to note, not worth cursing. The castle's work continues. So does his. When the king descends to the crypts with Lord Stark, rumor travels the halls like wind through tall grass. A name, Lyanna, rises and falls in careful tones. Jon does not know why the sound tightens something in him. He only knows Winterfell has rooms that feel like questions made of stone. In those days, Ned's face turns gentler and further away, as if duty presses a hand between shoulder blades. Jon does not ask. He has learned the outline of shut doors and the patience required to wait beside them. Benjen Stark arrives with the smell of horse, pine, and long cold nights clinging to his cloak. He brings stories of the wall, of rangers and ravens, of a cold so clean it hums. Jon feels the pull like a true note, clear, spare, honest. The Night's Watch, Benjen says, binds men by oath, not by birth. Service instead of surname, usefulness instead of inheritance. Jon imagines black wool, hard work, comradeship won by effort. He imagines a life where the word that keeps him at the edge loses the power to name his center. He tells Benjen he wishes to take the black, and the ranger's eyes soften with caution. The watch, Benjen warns, is colder and hungrier than any fine speech in a warm hall. Jon hears this and does not look away. He is young, but certainty in him feels older than his years. Later, Ned speaks to him in private. He cannot grant Jon the Stark name. He can grant blessing for a path of honor. It is not the answer Jon longs for. It is the answer he can build with. Before departures, Winterfell grows full of soft, unfinished goodbyes. After Bran's fall, a tower room smells of herbs and worry guarded by love. Lady Catelyn sits vigil, grief a weather system that leaves no space for Jon's voice. He understands and withdraws, carrying his wish for Bran like a candle cupped from wind. In the corridor, he meets Robb's strained smile and Sansa's pale concern, and gives what he can. Steadiness, a promise to right, a hand on a shoulder that says not everything has fallen. In the armory, he asks Mikken for a slim blade and sheath, nothing fancy, balanced like a thought that knows its point. He brings it to Arya and watches her eyes light with a joy that refuses apology. They talk about practice and posture, and keeping light on the feet. He does not say everything. He does not need to. She hugs him with quick fierceness, the kind of embrace that keeps warm long after hands part. Jon hopes the blade will teach her discipline and will, and also the grace of choosing when not to use it. He seeks each sibling in turn as if circling a clock. With Robb, a last slow spar that keeps smiles near. With Bran, a whisper he hopes can find dreams. With Rickon, a kneel to eye level and a ruffle of impossible hair. With Sansa, formal courtesy answered by a surprising softness. She thanks him quietly for gentleness with her sister. These moments are small only in length. They are the ballast he ties to memory so it will not blow away. Ned meets him under the old stone arch where snow piles deepest. The talk is brief and careful. Ned promises that one day he will speak of Jon's mother. That promise lands like a seed pressed into patient soil. It is not an answer, and it is not nothing. Father and son part without flourish, and the absence of spectacle makes room for dignity. There is a heroism in saying only what must be said, then trusting time to carry the rest. Departure paints the courtyard in cold geometry. Horses stamp, breath clouds. The party bound south shines with the color and noise of court. The small company for the north looks spare, practical, ready. Jon clasps Robb's forearm, glances toward Bran's window, tries not to notice the hollowness in Lady Catelyn's face. Ghost stays by his knee, pale as promise. When the gate opens, Jon looks back once, not at the people but at the place. He takes the picture of Winterfell and sets it like a small shield behind his ribs. On the road the world widens and quiets. Trees thin. The sky opens. Nights carry a bright cold that feels almost clean. Benjen speaks sparingly, pointing out old stones, ruined towers, the marks left by winters that spared no name. Jon listens with a mind like an open palm. He is not afraid of pain, he is afraid of failing the life he has chosen. When the wall finally lifts against the horizon, it does not look like a prison. It looks like a line etched for clarity. Here is where keeping begins. Yet Winterfell does not loosen its hold. It rides with him in his posture, and in the way he measures words, in the courtesy he shows strangers, and the respect he gives rules, even as he learns when rules must bend. Winterfell taught him how to step aside without vanishing, how to stand his ground without shouting. It taught him that love can exist where it cannot be named, and that kindness offered without demand can make a place inside another's guarded heart. Bastard trails him like a sleigh track across new snow, visible and undeniable. but not the only mark on the field. Jon learns to make other tracks. He corrects a younger boy's stance in the yard without condescension. He carries trays in the hall without sulking and thanks the servants by name. When Arya returns from some small trouble with mud on her boots, he finds her later and tells a gentle story until she grins. Repeated kindness becomes a rope. You pull on it and discover it is anchored to strength. Ghost is his daily miracle. The wolf rarely makes a sound, but presence is its own language. If Jon's mood stumbles, Ghost leans lightly against his knee. If Jon laughs, the wolf's ears tilt as if catching a kinder wind. People speak of dire wolves as legends, but Jon learns to love ordinary fidelity, shared steps, shared quiet, the heartbeat that says you are not alone. In a world where titles often arrive before faces, such companionship becomes a harbor. The cold stays, but it bites less. There are nights when he wonders what life might have been if his name aligned with his blood. The question passes like a cloud. What remains is habit. He would still rise early. He would still practice longer than pride requires. He would still protect the small. The difference in the other life is simply the doors that would open on a first knock. In this life, he learns how to knock twice and how to step back with dignity when necessary. Neither lesson is wasted. Ned's silence about the past could be a stone to trip on. Jon sets his foot differently and makes it a step. Not knowing becomes a kind of education. A man can do the next right thing without a full map. That habit will matter later when storms turn paths to mud and choices to risk. At Winterfell, it begins with a boy choosing to trust the love beneath a limit. Love can be quiet and still be strong. He carries that truth like flint. From the battlements, Winterfell looks like a constellation set in stone. Towers and courtyards, the godswood's crimson star, the long lines of walls shining with rhyme. Jon memorizes it as if he might someday need to say the picture aloud to keep it from fading. The smell of the kennels, the echo in the hall before a feast begins, the way light climbs the armory wall on clear mornings. He folds these details like letters travelers keep near the skin. When the world grows loud, he will open them for quiet. On his last night before the northward ride, Jon returns to the godswood. The weirwood's carved face seems almost thoughtful. He kneels and lets the cold move through him until it belongs there. He does not bargain. He does not ask. He simply thanks the place that held him, even at an angle. Snow begins to fall in unhurried flakes, and he senses not a promise of safety, but permission to continue. Ghost rises when he rises. Together they leave their prints and do not look back. In memory, Winterfell keeps him honest. When choices tangle later, he returns in thought to the boy who helped in the kitchens, who stood aside for a grieving lady, who listened carefully to correction and practiced again. Dignity, he decides, is not something others give or take. It is something you carry or set down. He chooses to carry it, even when it weighs more than comfort. Winterfell gave him walls against the wind. It also taught him how to be a wall when others needed shelter. Memory makes a campfire of these days. He remembers the prickle of straw in the stables, iron's smell in the armory, the steady rasp of Ghost's breath beside his bed. He remembers Arya's grin, Robb's easy confidence, Sansa's careful courtesy, Bran's patient questions, Rickon's laughter. He remembers the weight of not knowing and the steadiness of choosing anyway. From such threads a compass forms. Winterfell gives him north, and it gives him true north. Duty and mercy walking side by side. With those directions he can travel, into cold, into dark, into the life waiting beyond the wall. Chapter 2, The Wall, A New Beginning. The road to the wall feels like a long, slow exhale as the north opens into pine and pale sky. Jon rides beneath a cold that is clean rather than cruel, the kind that trims thoughts to their true shapes. With each mile, the world he is leaving becomes a picture held at arm's length. With each mile, the world he is approaching gathers weight like weather that does not threaten, only insists. Benjen Stark rides ahead and beside, speaking little and pointing often. At first, the wall is not a structure but a horizon set upright. It swallows the eye. Sunlight slides over its face and cannot warm it. Crows tilt and circle like scattered commas in a blank white page. Beneath that immensity, Jon feels small in a way that is not shame but instruction. Smallness teaches attention and asks a man to measure himself by his choices rather than his size. Castle Black crouches at the foot of all that ice, a cluster of timber and stone that looks temporary because the wall behind it looks eternal. Smoke curls from chimneys, dark threads against a pale sky. Men move with a rhythm of work that repeats, that repairs, that prepares. The first sound Jon hears is honest, axes finding wood, boots on packed snow, voices trading simple words. He thinks, here is a place where usefulness is the language, and he answers in his heart. Benjen delivers him to the yard and to Sir Alliser Thorne, whose mouth seems made for winter. Thorne speaks like a saw cutting the knot from a board. He has no patience for romance or for the softness of boys from good houses. He calls Jon Lord Snow with a curl that makes the courtesy sting. The name pricks pride, and the prick wakes something useful. Jon recognizes the lesson hidden in the insult. You will need to earn the right to be here. Training begins at once, less a ceremony than a shore where waves never stop. The yard is a small world of wooden swords and scuffed snow, of bruises that bloom and breath that smokes and disappears. Jon discovers that skill learned in Winterfell's yard does not crown him here. It must be broken down and rebuilt until quickness is joined to judgment and control keeps company with strength. He takes his knocks without complaint and finds quietly and with relief that work is a place where the word bastard loses teeth. He meets Grin, all shoulders and earnest effort, and Pip, whose tongue runs quicker than his feet but not by much. He meets Rast, who hoards meanness like a miser hoards copper, and learns to step aside from pettiness before it drags him down. He meets Donal Noye, the one-armed smith, whose fire burns as warm as his counsel. Noye tells him hard truths without dressing them in pretty cloth. Steel, Noye says, is made better by the strike and the quench. So are boys. The watch is a refuge built from consequences. Some recruits chose this path to avoid a worse end. Some were driven to it by hunger or law or both. Jon listens to stories told low at night and learns that judgment sits easier when it arrives after understanding. He shares bread. He shares silence. He offers help in the yard without showing off. And slowly the air around him changes. Respect grows like frost, invisibly, and then all at once. Sir Alliser continues to test him, pushing until he finds the places where pride is hiding. When Jon corrects another boy too sharply, Thorne smirks and calls it lordly. Jon feels the hot flush of old habits and then lets it pass. Later he apologizes to the boy, and the apology costs nothing but gives back more than it took. He begins to see that leadership is a craft with joinery and tolerances, and the patience of a good carpenter. Nails do not drive themselves straight on the first swing. The first night in the barracks is a lesson in sound. Men snore in different keys. Someone whispers a prayer in the old tongue. Wind fingers the shutters with a touch that is not quite gentle. Ghost lies down where Jon can drop a hand and feel fur. The wolf settles the way a hearth settles a room, not by making noise, but by being a steady fact. Jon sleeps, not deeply yet. but enough, and wakes before dawn ready to try again. At meals, the food is plain and sufficient. Porridge that warms, bread that steadies, stew that puts strength back where the yard took it. The talk is practical, which roof leaks, which hinge sticks, which raven bruised a wing on landing, and needs a day to recover. Jon finds comfort in how much survival is made of little repairs. Grand speeches are rare. Good hammers are common. That suits him. Maester Aemon sits like time, given a kind face, wrapped in wool and wisdom. His eyes are clouded, but his voice is clear water over stone. In the rookery, he shows Jon how to read a raven's mood by the set of its head and the shape of its wing. He speaks of messages that must travel no matter the weather, and of truths that must be carried even when no one welcomes them. Jon feels the old man's attention like sunlight in winter, sparse but focused, warming what it touches. Jorah Mormont, the Lord Commander, is built like a keep that has seen storms and still stands because it was put up right the first time. He watches new men with a patience that is not soft. When Jon speaks to him, he speaks simply, and the truth fits both ways. The old bear, as the men call him, does not waste praise. When he gives it, Jon stores it like dry kindling. He does not know when he will need it, only that he will. Samwell. Tarly arrives like a bird fallen far from a safer nest. He is frightened and soft in the places this world rewards least. The yard laughs at him. Ser Alliser hunts him with drills designed to humiliate rather than help. Jon watches and remembers his own first stings and chooses a different answer. He makes a shelter around Sam, arranging partners in practice, quietly explaining grips and stances, standing nearby when voices rise. Others drift toward that small circle until it becomes a new weather. Sam's gratitude is enormous and awkward, and Jon meets it with careful ease. They talk at night, Sam's voice a low stream in the dark. Sam knows songs and stories, and the names of old things. He understands how fear works, and how courage can be as simple as showing up again tomorrow. Jon learns that bravery comes in different shapes, and that his own is only one of them. In return, he offers Sam the kind of steadiness that cannot be taught in a day. We will face this together. There is a night when wine loosens the younger men, and the older ones go to Molestown for comfort that pretends to be love. Pip teases Jon to come along. He goes as far as the tunnel and then stops. There is longing in him, yes, but there is also a desire to keep certain rooms within untroubled. He turns back. Later in the yard, the air is cold and clean. Ghost lopes out of the dark and presses his head into Jon's hand. The gesture answers a question Jon did not fully know he was asking. Snow begins to fall with the patient insistence that defines the far north. The yard hushes beneath it. Tasks slow and do not stop. Jon learns to mend what he wears and to recognize a good edge when he holds it. Donal Noy lets him work the bellows and feel how metal softens before it blooms. He says little while Jon labors and then, when the moment is right, points at the color of the steel and names it correct. Praise can be a single word that lands like a hand on a shoulder. When orders come for assignments, the hall gathers its breath. Men will be made builders, rangers, stewards. Each role keeps the whole from failing. Many hope for the glamour of the forests and the honor of the patrol. Jon expects Ranger because he is quick and able, and because youth is a mirror that sometimes shows exactly what it wants to see. Instead, Bowen Marsh reads the words that place Jon among the stewards, assigned to Lord Commander Mormont himself. The surprise is a sharp taste. Pride leaps before understanding has a chance to put on its boots. Jon feels himself flush and hears the blood in his ears. He steps into the cold without asking permission, and paces the yard until the heat in his chest can hear. Sam finds him and speaks softly, explaining what Donal Noy already suggested, that service to Mormont is not a demotion, but a direction. Maester Aemon later says the quiet part aloud. Some men are put near a commander not to fetch wood, but to learn which fires deserve tending. Jon returns to the hall and chooses to accept the post with the grace he wishes he had shown first. In the days that follow, he wakes earlier and works later. He brings maps and lamps and hard truths to Mormont. He learns which letters cannot wait, which ravens must go even when the weather says no. He watches the old bear decide, then watches him carry the weight of that choice without noise. It is a second education layered over the first. The vows come on a day the air tastes like iron. A small band of recruits walk beneath the wall into the haunted forest, where snow sifts from branches with a sound like old paper. They stand before a heart tree whose face looks both kinder and more severe than the one at Winterfell. Words are spoken that have shaped men since before anyone alive was born. Jon speaks them in a voice steady as a level line. He will take no wife, he will hold no lands, he will father no children, he will wear no crowns. When the oath settles, a hush falls that is not only the hush of snow, it is the pause of a door closing and another opening properly for the first time. Jon feels lighter and heavier at once. He is no longer wandering between homes. He has one, though it is made of cold and duty. He sets his hand on Ghost's head and feels the wolf's living warmth and thinks that even here there is kindness. Winter sends new lessons in darker envelopes. One night a dead man walks, a body hauled from the forest that would not stay what the mind expects it to be. The smell is wrong. The chill is wrong. When it moves, the moment breaks something ordinary and replaces it with a different rule. The thing comes for Mormont, and there is no time for terror, only motion. Jon acts not because he is fearless, but because practice writes its own quick script. He throws the lamp. Fire answers a question steel could not. The body burns with a steadiness that is almost calm, as if what animated it had been colder than flame could think to be. Mormont staggers up, alive and furious at being nearly taken in his sleep. Later the old bear looks at Jon and sees more than luck. In the morning a sword changes hands. Longclaw leaves the Mormont line and enters Jon's keeping. It fits not because it is a prize, but because it is a responsibility shaped like steel. The blade is Valyrian, dark in the light, alive in the way good tools are. Jon feels the truth of it through the grip. This is not for showing. This is for keeping others safe. He practices until his arm remembers, until the edge becomes the period at the end of a sentence the body knows how to write. Men clap him on the shoulder, and even Sir Alice's insults land with less bite. The yard notices. It does not fuss. It nods and carries on. Letters arrive from the south, carrying news like weather. Kings and claimants and marches. For the watch, every crown is distant thunder. The storm that matters walks on cold feet. Signs gather. The old bear chooses to ride out and learn, to read the forest before it writes itself upon the wall. Orders move through the castle like a tide that rises without foam. Oil is checked. Arrows are counted. Packs are filled. Men who will not go sharpen what they have and pretend they are not watching the rest. Craster's name threads through the talk. A man who keeps a hold beyond the wall and deals with the watch when it suits him. The stories are uneasy. He is not kindly. He marries his daughters and makes the house into a circle without windows. Mormont says they will stop there, take shelter, take information, and move on. Jon says nothing until he must. When he meets Gilly, a girl with tired eyes and stubbornness that glows like a coal in ash, he hears in her voice the shape of a life trapped in a narrow room. He suspects what Craster does with his sons because suspicion here is another word for sight. In the night, he follows the old man and sees the truth delivered to cold. The forest watches and does not interfere. Jon's stomach turns with a heat that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with mercy. He tells Mormont. The old bear does not deny the horror, only names the cost of breaking certain arrangements before the watch is ready. Survival, he says, sometimes rides a hard horse. Jon hears and remembers. On the ride north from Craster's, Snow writes steady lines across the world. The rangers spread out the way geese do, keeping sight without clumping into a single target. Ghost ranges wider, a pale flicker among trunks, returning with a shake of fur and a look that Jon has learned to read. He thinks often of Benjen, of the chair that remains empty. He thinks of vows and of their shape. The promise to the living requires attention to the dead and to whatever would trouble the distance between. When camps are made, they are made with quiet economy. Fires are small. Talk is smaller. Men sleep in layers of sound, the crack of a twig, the soft fall of ash, the whisper of a man turning in his bedroll and pulling the blanket closer by inches. Jon takes his watch and lets the night flow past like a river he is not meant to drive from. Sometimes he hears a far cry that is not a bird. Sometimes he hears nothing and is grateful. Each morning begins with the arithmetic of cold. Count fingers, count toes, count men. A missed number early can become a grief later. Mormont walks the line like a farmer reading his fields after a storm, making little corrections with a big effect. Jon watches and learns how command is made mostly of attention paid in time. He polishes Longclaw. He writes the small reports that make up a larger understanding. He becomes the set of eyes the old bear can borrow when his own are elsewhere. They climb the wall in the wooden cage and ask the ancient ice to allow passage. The world falls away beneath them, not violently but completely, until the ground is a map and the sky a roof that appears close enough to touch. At the top, wind rides hard across their faces and tries to take the breath given by effort. Men laugh because laughter is a way to keep fear from becoming a second cold. Jon looks west and east and north and south and thinks of a compass that finally knows the center of its circle. On the far side, the gate opens with a reluctance earned by centuries. The forest beyond stands dark and waiting, not hostile, not friendly, simply itself. Jon steps forward with the first file, Longclaw at his hip, Ghost slipping ahead like a piece of winter that chose a shape. Behind him comes the old bear, then Sam, then men with names that sound right in this air. The snow gives underfoot the way snow does, surrendering and then holding. The sound of it is their drum. The world here lives by rules that do not ask the South for approval. Signs appear that mean little until a ranger speaks them aloud. A cut branch placed just so, a heap of stones that is not a cairn, a silence that says someone was here and chose to leave nothing to point at them. Jon learns to see second stories layered over first ones, to read not only what happens, but what could happen given the shape of the ground and the mood of the weather. At night, under a heaven so crowded with stars they seem to jostle, Jon thinks of the words of the vow. I am the sword in the darkness, the watcher on the walls. The phrases do not swagger in his head. They sit down with him and share the blanket. They borrow his breath and give it back steadier. Duty, he understands, is not a mountain you climb once. It is the road itself, and the walking is the point. Snow deepens. The miles add their own arithmetic. They find the fist of the first men and take its high circle, stone upon stone, as if the past had built them a bowl to hold their small flame. Here the rangers gather, and the camp becomes a town of spareness and resolve. Fires burn, guarded like elders. Orders move. The old bear sends men like questions into the trees, and they return with answers written in worry. Something is coming that is not army and not weather, and yet it will fight like both. Jon cleans Longclaw again and again. More for the calm than the polish. Ghost's head lifts often, ears pricked, eyes bright in a way that makes the dark look thoughtful. Sam stacks his notes and asks quiet questions about a weirwood he saw and the meanings of old carvings. Jon answers where he can and admits ignorance where he must. He has learned that not knowing is not a flaw when it walks beside honesty. Word arrives in the most practical way there is. Men who went out do not come back on time. Then a horn calls once, and then again, and each blast means something learned long ago. The camp tightens. Spears are checked. Bowstrings are plucked for truth. Mormont's shoulders rise and square, and then drop into the set that says he is ready. Jon stands a half step behind him, and to the right, a good place to see and to be useful. He does not think of glory. He thinks of holding. This, then, is the beginning the wall promised. Not a ceremony, not a moment to pin on a calendar, but the slow arrival of a responsibility that fills the shape of a life. Jon is no longer the boy measuring himself against a name. He is a man measuring himself against his word. The forest breathes, the snow falls, the stars continue their patient arguments. Jon takes another step north, and the story follows. In that quiet, under a sky that keeps its counsel, he breathes once more, squares his shoulders, and accepts that beginnings rarely announce themselves. They arrive as work, as watch, as friends beside a fire, and as the simple promise he carries within, to keep the living safe until morning finds the wall again. Always. Chapter 3. Beyond the wall, love and trial. The ranging north from the fist scatters like sparks before a wind, and duty sends Jon with Corin Halfhand. The Frostfangs lift against a hard sky, and the air tastes of iron and old secrets. Corin says little, and what he says is the kind that lodges, simple as bone. Learn the land. Watch the signs. Spend courage only where it buys tomorrow. They move lean through narrow passes where stone holds its breath. The men with them are careful steps gathered into a path, stone snake, ebon. Small knots of skill tied tight against the cold. Tracks appear, fade, then return, as if the snow were reconsidering what to confess. Far off an eagle turns slow circles, a punctuation mark watching a sentence unfold. One dawn they come upon a wildling band on a ridge sketched thin with frost. Steel would be noise. Corin wants answers. The clash is brief and rough, fought with the economy of men who know winter is the true enemy. When the last shapes fall still, one figure remains kneeling, breath visible, hair bright as foxfire against the snow. Ygritte looks up at Jon with defiance strung through weariness. She speaks with the free folk's easy scorn and their plain truth. She calls him Crow and laughs at his careful courtesy. Jon has the right to end her and the order to gather information, but mercy rises like a remembered friend. He spares her, ties her, and hears her story begin to unspool. She says the free folk follow Mance Raider because cold and death march behind them. She says the wall is not a border to her people, only a tall lie of southern making. Jon listens, and the listening shifts him a degree from where he stood at dawn. He believes his oath and still feels the tug of the human voice in front of him. When Ygritte slips free in the dark, she leaves laughter behind like a footprint. The next day the wildlings return in number, bone and bronze, and fletching bright with practicality. Rattleshirt, the Lord of Bones, grins through a helm of scavenged ribs. Corin does not waste fear on theatre. He judges the ground, measures odds, and begins to spend himself wisely. Capture arrives as it often does, by accumulation rather than thunder. Hands take weapons, questions begin, cold watches. Jon understands he is now both message and listener. Corin's eyes find him, flint, recognizing steel. In a low voice meant for one person and a larger future, the half-hand gives him a task that tastes like ash and honor at once. Yield, Corin says, a word sharpened by purpose. Go to them. Learn. Live. The order is a door to a room without windows. Jon nods, because refusal would waste the sacrifice already shaping. When the moment comes, he plays the part, and part of him breaks neatly along a fault he had long pretended was not there. Rattleshirt drags them toward the king the Watch calls renegade, and the free folk call their own. Along the way, Ygritte walks near Jon and needles him with stories of songs sung under open sky. She is quick and stubborn and warmer than the air by stubbornness alone. Sometimes she falls quiet, and those silences say as much as her jibes. They reach Mance Rayder's camp, a nation traveling on foot. Children chase dogs between cook fires. Old women stitch fur with fingers that do not tremble. Warriors oil bowstrings and test spear points that glint like ice in brief sun. Jon expected only enemies and finds a people arranged around necessity. The sight complicates hatred until it can no longer stand. Mance sits without crown or pretension, a king because others will their courage through him. His cloak is crow-black and wildling red, his voice even. He asks Jon why he left his brothers. Jon offers the reason the half-hand planted, a command denied, a pride wounded, a life turned north because south closed its hand. Ygritte watches, eyes bright, weighing truth against need. Tormund Giantsbane laughs like a friendly avalanche, his beard a story of its own. He thumps Jon's back, claims him for the spears under his charge, and says the boy needs new boots and better jokes. Oral, a warg whose mind can climb into birds, studies Jon as if measuring a lie's seam. The free folk make space for him without softening their edges. Life among them is work and wind and the stubborn practice of staying alive. Tents go up in minutes and come down even faster. Meat is shared, and so are warnings. They tell him about weepers in the night and blue shadows that do not leave footprints like men. Around fires they sing of valleys with summer in them and remember faces lost to storms. Jon watches and learns. A spy who is also a student. He sees how the free folk answer to no lord, how a spearwife can stand equal with a chieftain if she has the will and the skill. He hears in their talk a constant drum. The others are moving, the dead do not stay, the wall is a line they must cross or end. Ygritte teaches him to find shelter in rock, where others see only shadow. She shows him how to set a snare and how to smile with half his face when wind steals the other half. He teaches her a Winterfell song, low and plain, and she laughs at the chorus before humming it perfectly. Their banter sands down into something that feels like warmth, earned honestly. One night in a cave where ice curtains hang like the ribs of an old cathedral, she pulls him deeper into the dark until water sings a small, steady song. Here vows feel distant, and the world shrinks to bare shoulders and shared breath. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," she whispers, not an insult now, but an invitation to set certainty aside. They make a life inside a day, and the cave keeps their secret like a friend. After, they lie quiet and let the small echoes fade back into stone. Jon thinks of oaths as paths rather than chains, and wonders whether two paths can run together for a while before parting without betrayal. Ygritte dozes, and he smooths her hair, careful as prayer. Outside, the wind remembers its work. Orders move through the camp. They will climb the wall and come over into the Greenlands, not as raiders only, but as a people seeking to live past a winter that feels like an ending. Jarl will lead the climb. Orell will scout in the eagle's body. Tormund will bring the jokes and the rope. Halfway up, the skin of the wall shears. A plate groans and sloughs like a glacier shrugging. Jarl's line snaps, and the man falls with a clean, terrible silence. Orell unhooks and saves himself by making calculation faster than mercy. Jon feels the ice move like a sleeping animal beneath his palms. Ygritte slips, and for a heartbeat there is only choice. He anchors, swings, and catches her with a jerk that sends black stars across his vision. His shoulder screams, but he holds. She swears at him for a full minute after they find a ledge, and then kisses him with a gratitude sharpened by fear. When they crest the top, the sun lays out the south like an answered riddle. They stand in wind that has touched two worlds. On the far side, green spreads like a promise. Ygritte looks at it with a hunger not for conquest, but for a future. Jon feels that ache through her and inside himself, but another ache sits beside it, familiar as Ghost's steady presence. He is of the Watch. Whatever he borrows now, he will pay back later, with interest measured in hurt. Days follow that are made of walking and of almost peace. They cross fields where old stone fences drink sunlight and wake. Ygritte marvels at windmills. Jon explains wells as if he invented them. The sight of ordinary life becomes its own grief, because some of this may not survive what marches. Tormund tells stories that play at the edge of nonsense and truth. Orell does not soften. He sends the eagle to wheel above Jon and returns with judgments nobody asked for. He calls Jon Crow and says the feathers are still visible no matter the fur he wears. Jon answers with patience for a while, then with a colder patience that simply removes its attention. Distrust keeps a man alive until it doesn't, Tormund says, and shrugs. Mansa's orders scatter raiding parties like seeds on a wind. Jon goes with Ygritte and a knot of spearwives and bowmen across fields that smell of grass and surprise. Their task is to break small defenses, steal horses, and measure how ready the North is to answer. The first farm they approach holds nothing but goose feathers and an old dog's puzzled bark. At Queen's Crown, a half-drowned tower lifts from a green moat, and the weather plays tricks with sound. They find a horse breeder on the road, a man whose fear shakes a bridle chain like sleigh bells. Orell wants him dead because witnesses turn into walls later. Ygritte looks to Jon and reads the argument happening behind his eyes. Jon cannot kill a man who kneels and pleads only to keep breathing. He has seen execution done with gravity, and this would not be that. He steps aside, lowers his sword, and suggests taking the horses and leaving the man to his frightened life. Orell's mouth twists. Ygritte's mouth firms. The man bolts, and the air fills with a kind of choice that makes or unmakes. They give chase, a pounding line over wet grass that throws clods like thrown stones. The old man rides for safety and almost makes it. When he falls, he staggers to his feet with the stubborn awkwardness of someone who does not believe in ending. Orell orders Jon to prove himself, to finish what refusal began. Ygritte watches from a knife's length away. Jon cannot do it. The core that the Watch built and Winterfell braced simply will not bend here. He shoves Orell, then runs for the open field, because everything else has closed. Bolts hiss and miss. Ygritte's first arrow finds his leg like a sentence he knew was coming. He stumbles, corrects, and keeps moving while the eagle dives rage into his face. He rides in a world narrowed to pain, branches, and the old knowledge of where the wall stands, even when you cannot see it. Memory becomes a map. A stream he crossed days ago gives itself again. A hill offers a better line than fear would choose. When night drops like a blanket, he hides beneath it and listens to his breath like a prayer that still works. By dawn, he can stand the wound enough to move without bleeding out his resolve. He finds the worn road that leads to Castle Black, because worn roads are honest even when men are not. A watchman's horn carries across the ice with a sound of relief disguised as alarm. Hands lift him down. Someone shouts for the maester. Ghost circles twice, then lies with his head on Jon's boot. News travels faster than stitches hold. The free folk are moving along the ridges, falling toward the wall like a white river that refuses instruction. Some names come with the news, and Jon cannot put them down. Ygritte, Tormund, Mance. Orell is gone, and the knowledge does not bring comfort. Ghost dreams with his paws running, and Jon rests a hand to still them. In the small hours he remembers the cave, the curve of Ygritte's smile, the heat of a fire that asked nothing. He does not regret loving her. He does regret the shape the world forces love to take when oaths and survival stand in the same doorway. As you listen, let that truth sit without judgment. Two good claims can shout each other hoarse, and both remain true. The old bear is gone now. Fate met on another road, and command speaks with different voices. Jon offers what he learned, maps he drew with footsteps, and the count of spears he saw. He does not puff himself. He does not minimize. He gives the watch the gift he went north to bring, wrapped in pain and carried back under snow. What he keeps is quieter. The understanding that the free folks' hunger is not plunder only, but a vault against a colder hunger behind them. He knows their songs now, their jokes, their stubborn children who will clap at windmills. He knows that when battle comes, his sword must answer to duty, but his heart, if it remembers, will bleed slower for what he cuts. Before he can stand long at the wall walk, he goes to the Godswood because habit is a bridge. Castle Black's trees are lean ghosts compared to Winterfell's great heart, but the air is honest. He thanks whatever listens for the strength that did not abandon him when choices sharpened. He asks nothing for himself and everything for the living who will press against this stone in days to come. The sky clears with that peculiar northern generosity that follows a punishing storm. The wall throws light back into the faces of men who will climb its steps and wait. Jon tests his leg and finds it ready to be what it must. He straps Longclaw on and touches Ghost's ear. A horn sounds, and he moves toward it as if moving toward his own name. Behind him, the path he took north remains, a line cut through snow and days, and a cave that felt like a hearth. Ahead, the work gathers and makes its argument. Between those points stands Jon Snow, changed but not unmade, carrying both a promise to his brothers and a quieter, harder promise to the truth that love taught him among people the South taught him to despise. The trial is not over. It has only learned new shapes. He will face them with the steady tools he trusts. Attention, patience, courage spent where tomorrow can use it. If sorrow arrives, it will sit beside him without bitterness. If memory stings, he will let it sting and keep his hand steady. Somewhere beyond the trees, Ygritte walks with the wind in her hair. He looks north once, south once, and then at the white line beneath his boots. Snow whispers over stone. The wall holds. Between love and oath, between past and task, Jon finds the narrow middle and steps onto it again. A watcher who learned the names of those he watches. A man who will stand, because standing is what he was made for. and because morning needs someone to hand it the world. Chapter 4. Battle for the Wall. Night lowers like a blanket stretched edge to edge, and Castle Black tightens its belts. Buckles click, bowstrings sing, and the wall stands white and listening. Jon walks the top walk with the slow, even gait of someone teaching his body calm. The wind licks his face clean, and the stone stairs feel sure underfoot. Somewhere below, Ghost threads the shadows, a small promise of steadiness that keeps the cold from turning to fear. Rumor became smoke, smoke became signals, and signals became the shape of an army. Mance Rayder has gathered clans, Thenns, raiders, and all the restless families who would rather gamble on southward ground than wait for the darkness marching behind them. North of the wall, campfires bead along the trees, moving like embers in a breathing lung. South of it, the village promises alleys and arrow angles for a second force. The watch is a hinge set between both hands. Sir Alliser Thorne wears command like a hair shirt and does not bother to soften his edges. He snaps at hesitation because hesitation spreads. Janos Slint puffs his chest as if authority were a cloak, then looks for some convenient cellar to define as strategic. Jon ignores both contests and counts what matters: arrows, oil, rope, hearts. Men listen best to the work in front of them. Dusk shoes, the world in blue. Archers settle along the crenelles. Silhouettes thinned by cold and purpose. Barrels stand ready. Pitch, lamp oil, sand, stones, and the ugly mixture that makes flame fast. Winch lines hum as the massive scythe blades and grapnels are tested, then left cocked like thoughts you intend to use later. Bells remain silent. Bells offer news, and what approaches is older than news. The first horn from the village drags every gaze south. Torches spill into the lanes, streaks of orange that promise teeth inside the dark. Then shields glint. From the north, a second, deeper music answers. Mammoths groaning into harness, giants bellowing rhythm, the creak of chains thick as a man's thigh. The wall cannot stand in both places at once, so the men upon it must. Jon takes the southern run because the village was his before it burned. His breath becomes a metronome. His hands do clean work. Targets are shapes. Shapes turn into choices. Choices keep other men breathing. Sir Alliser patrols the line, voice like a rasp on soft wood, while Donal Noy sinks to the gate with the particular gravity of a smith anchoring a bridge. The first rush breaks against the stockade and finds splinters, not surrender. Arrows stitch the open ground. Jon's bow hums small and constant, a useful insect among larger noises. He watches for the ones who lead the violence, and he asks his shafts to interrupt sentences before they become paragraphs. The raiders come on anyway, practiced at stepping over the fallen without stopping to be cruel. On the far face of the wall, giants shuffle toward the gate like moving hills. A hammer appears, iron and tree trunk married into one problem. Mammoths strain, steam rising from their heads like winter prayers. The men on the top walk feel small, and then remember that smallness can still be precise. Ladders clatter up against ice, hooks bite, hands climb. Thorne owns the rhythm until steel kisses his ribs and paints his speech red. He bares his teeth at pain, refuses poetry, and gives the line to Jon with a curt nod that is almost a bow. "Hold," he says, and it is both order and blessing. Jon accepts the grip of command like a cold hilt and begins to spend calm exactly where panic wants to bargain. Oil pours, not as rage, but as geometry. Pitch follows, black and patient, then a thrown torch that writes a fast sentence across the ladder faces. Men drop, others climb. The wall becomes a street, and streets can be defended. Jon keeps orders short and human. Left 3, down 2, breathe, loose. A scythe blade whispers down its track and harvests more than wheat. Below, chaos finds the courtyard. Thens taste blood and push. Tormund's laugh arrives before his axe. Pip runs messages with the quick, light feet of a boy who has always needed to move. He dies with half a word on his mouth, an arrow in his throat, and duty still in his hands. Jon does not stop. Later will claim its due. Right now the living need their names called. Noye hears the true hinge groan, and takes Gren and a handful to the tunnel. The gate is a long throat of old ice and older stone. "Hold the gate," he says, as if asking them to hold a door. The order arrives simple and becomes sacred. Gren answers with the vow, and the others join, voice upon voice, until the tunnel itself seems to remember why it was built. The giant comes like an avalanche that chose a shape. He smashes timbers. He bleeds the dark. Spears shiver, break, and are replaced by stubbornness. Gren steps where fear wanted space and plants the point that finally halts that huge, astonished heart. When quiet lands, it is not empty. It is full of the cost. No one inside that hush kept anything back. On the top walk, a giant archer looses a spear-thick arrow and nails a man to stone. The sight shrinks every chest. Jon calls for the scorpion, the great crossbow that eats muscle and spits iron truth. The first bolt sails high, the second bruises, the third enters like a syllable the body understands. The giant sits down as if remembering an appointment. The line breathes again. In the village, Ygritte hunts stair to stair, quiet as snowfall and quick as a thought. She chooses targets that shout. She does not look toward the wall. She looks toward the work in front of her and the small lives it endangers. Oryl's eagle wheels overhead, angry wind with eyes. Tormund breaks a gate and crows, then curses, then laughs, then fights on, unwilling to let a story end without a better punchline. Janos Slint proves unequal to anything that needs spine. He invents important basements. Satin, the recruit others doubted, holds a section with hands steadier than his name suggests. Sir Alistair, bandaged and pale, refuses sleep and walks again, growls softer, eyes harsher. Between them, the watch functions, not on pride, but on a series of small, exact obediences that add up to survival. The night tilts. Ladders multiply. Ropes hiss and snag. Jon runs the length of the parapet, correcting angles, rationing fire, reminding hands how to count. Twice he almost dies. Twice habit moves faster than thought. He starts to believe they might see dawn if they keep refusing the dramatic gesture and keep choosing the useful one. Then he meets Tormund in the inner yard. For a heartbeat, they stand close enough to see how tired the other is. Tormund salutes with his axe, a friendly insult, then attacks with the cheer of a man who likes living even while trying to kill you. The clash is brief, hard, and honest. They part without conclusion, tugged by the larger tides. Some friendships understand their limits under moonlight. Ygritte finds the small square below a tower, just as Jon steps into sight. She draws and holds. He turns his head like a man hearing something behind a door. Her arrow leaves. It finds leather and skin, but not depth. A boy behind her, small as question, lets fly. She staggers as if struck by a memory. When Jon reaches her, time makes a quiet room. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," she says, and the line carries every meaning it ever held. He smiles because there is nothing else to do with the hurt. He holds her as if warming a bird too tired to fly. When she is gone, he sets her down with care, and then steps back into the noise, because the living still ask for his hands. In the tunnel, the fallen have made a wall from themselves. The giant lies where he fell, eyes surprised by the idea of stopping. Gren's pike is snapped, his face calm. Jon stands there long enough to learn the shape of this silence. He will put names to it later. Now he takes its weight and returns to where men need the next arrow counted. Dawn slides pale along the ice and reveals ground chewed into mud and ash. The raiders retreat in clumps, not broken, simply exhausted. Tormund limps away, promising revenge and mead in the same breath. The watch leans on stone. Sir Alice's mouth twists into something like respect. Janos Slynt discovers that courage accumulates slowly and still has not found him. Ravens go south, with messages that do not beg. Jon turns his attention to repair. He walks the parapet with the patience of a mason. Arrows sorted, oil replenished, ropes replaced, morale nudged. He speaks to men by name. He drinks water in view of tired eyes. The wall teaches that leadership is mostly attention and the refusal to spend hope too quickly. By afternoon, smoke threads north like ink lines dragged by careful hands. Mance is arranging a second test with more weight. On the southern side, torch lines curl along the ridge like a false dawn. The mammoths return with heavier chains, and the giants bring hammers the size of doors. Jon checks Longclaw's balance. Hears Sir Roderick's ghost reminding him to keep his feet, and breathes. The second night writes the same words larger. The gate shakes hard enough to remember ages. The scorpion talks itself hoarse. Flaming barrels tumble and bloom. Ladders stick and must be cut. The line thins in places and thickens again, not with reinforcements but with will. Jon begins to understand the battle's arithmetic. They must not win spectacularly. They must refuse to lose. He chooses Saturn for the scorpion and does not call it bravery. He calls it trust. He sends the last fresh men to the east parapet and the inner stair. He ties a rope across a gusty gap and says nothing heroic about it. When a ladder refuses to break under force, he rigs a chain at an angle and drags until wood admits its mistake. In a still pocket between waves, a clear thought arrives. As long as Mance stands, the pressure will rebuild. Kill him, and the wave loses its shape. Save him, and the wave might become a wall they can climb together against the larger dark. Duty answers before longing can speak. Jon tells Sir Alicer he will go out and find the king. The words taste like iron and snow. Thorn studies him with a soldier's long memory and a craftsman's care. Pride argues and is sent to bed without supper. Go, he says, and tell him why we stand. Jon chooses few companions, then fewer, then none save Ghost. This is not a raid. It is a sentence with one verb. He leaves his place on the wall like a man stepping out of a painting's frame. The night beyond is thick and strangely clean. Snow muffles, trees listen, and the camp's great fire makes a glowing heart inside a cold body. Jon circles until the heat brushes his face. He steps into the ring of leaders with his weapon lowered and his voice kinder than the hour deserves. He speaks of children, ice, and the emptiness that walks with blue eyes. Mance listens because he has no time for lies. They talk like tired men building a bridge halfway across a river. For 3 breaths, Jon believes mercy might make a door where the wall cannot. Then horns cry from the south, banners bloom like late flowers, and iron flows over the ridge in neat, practiced waves. Stannis has arrived, narrow as judgment and twice as sharp. The free folk wheel to meet a new storm they did not ask to fight. Mance tries to save the center long enough to save his people. Jon steps back and becomes what he must be, the hinge between oaths and compassion. He lowers his sword, not as surrender, but as refusal to be one more random blade in a churn he did not call. By morning, the field is stamped flat by hooves and rewriting. Stannis's discipline holds the south. The free folk gather into smaller fires and smaller arguments. The wall remains itself, scarred and awake. Jon walks the parapet once more. He thanks those still standing by, doing, not speaking. He pauses by the tunnel, puts his palm to cold stone, and lets the quiet accept his promise. He finds the boy who fired the arrow and sits beside him without introducing guilt's vocabulary. 2 breaths later, the boy leans his shoulder against Jon's and watches the light climb the ice. Sir Alistair passes and growls a sentence that almost smiles. Janos Slint discovers paperwork. Satin sleeps with ink on his fingers and a faint, embarrassed pride. Above them all, the wall takes the new day and sends it back thinner and clearer, as winter does with every mercy. Jon inhales that clarity. He feels what the night gave and what it asked. He remembers Ygritte's mouth shaping snow into truth. He hears the echo of Gren's vow, transforming fear into architecture. He notes which men sang and which men became quiet tools. As you settle now, keep this picture: a high white wall, a narrow path, men moving with the small efficiencies that allowed morning to arrive. Below, the village quits smoking and accepts its new shapes. Beyond, the forest listens again because the noise has left. The hinge held. The world has been handed back to light. Jon, tired and certain, steps toward the next necessary thing with steady breath. He does not mistake calm for comfort. Calm is a tool, like rope, like flint, like saying a name before giving an order. He walks to the armory and helps stack what can be stacked. He listens to a cook explain how to stretch oats without dishonesty. He asks a builder where the parapet bowed and why. He sends a raven with a message that names the dead and does not flourish. He lets Ghost rest his head against his knee, and he lets himself rest a hand there without apology. In the Godswood he speaks softly, not because the trees require it, but because the living do. He thanks the night for sparing enough to hold the morning. He promises to spend their courage carefully. Then he returns to the wall walk, to the stone, to the men who are learning what it means to be still and useful. Winter watches, but so does he. The battle is not an end. It is a beginning. Noisy. The work remains simple and exacting. Breathe, look, listen, stand, endure, and keep the light. Chapter 5. Return and war. Snow covered the yard where Jon fell, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The brothers scattered, the echoes faded, and Ghost's cry thinned into the night. Davos found steadier men, dragged Jon's body from the cold, and barred a door against the wind. Inside, the room was small and honest, a table, a hearth, and the last fragile idea that a life can return if people refuse to leave. Melisandre arrived like a failing ember carrying a memory of fire. Her faith had cracked, but not broken. Doubt made her voice gentler. With water and whispers, with cut hair and careful hands, she asked for that which no hand can force. Outside, the wall did not stir. Inside, breath returned like a reluctant traveler who recognizes home only after stepping through its door. Jon awakened to pain shaped like truth. Something had been taken and something left behind. Cold edged every thought. Davos steadied him with simple sentences and a cup. Melisandre spoke of purpose without triumph. Jon listened and felt the shape of his life shift again toward duty, not because prophecy demanded it, but because the living still needed walls to hold. He stepped into the air that had watched him die. Men stared, then bowed their heads, then stood straighter, because the world had grown stranger yet steadier. Jon hanged the traitors, because justice must be kept bright enough to see by, and then he walked away from command, intending to leave the wall to those who would hold it. Sansa arrived covered in road and resolve, and the north opened inside his chest again. They planned beneath a ceiling stained with smoke, 2 Starks by bond, if not by parchment. Sansa spoke with a clarity winter gives. Ramsay held Winterfell, and Rickon was a hostage used as a lure. Jon argued caution, Sansa argued realism, and between them lay the only map that mattered. Letters were sent, banners were asked to rise, old promises were uncovered like tools half-rusted and still good. The answers came in threes: help, hesitation, refusal. Some houses offered men and bread because the name Stark still lit the dark. Others hid behind injuries or new loyalties. Lyanna Mormont, fierce beyond her years, measured Jon without blinking and gave enough soldiers to be noticed, and enough words to be remembered. Tormund brought free folk who trusted Jon more than they trusted any lord. It was not enough, but it was something that could be made more by nerve. On the day they marched, snow fell in a patient script. Ghost ranged, returning to touch Jon's hand with a nose and go again. Sansa rode with watchful quiet. Davos set a pace that tired could hold. Jon looked at the line and saw not an army but a promise. The North would try to remember itself. They camped within sight of Winterfell, close enough to smell wood smoke and hear hounds. Ramsay wrote with the cruelty of a boy who had found a crown in a game and refused to stop playing. He sent Rickon forward across open ground, a thread pulled and then cut. Jon moved without plan, only love, and the battle began at a run. Shields closed, lines bent, and the field turned to churned mud that swallowed care and rewarded momentum. Jon's horse died beneath him. The world narrowed to breath and the weight of bodies pressing in. Panic rose like water in a well. Then air arrived with a sound like a door opening. The Knights of the Vale, Sansa's quiet letter made into thunder. The line pivoted. Wun, last of the giants, broke the gate with hands shaped for mountains and fell with dignity that filled the yard. Ramsay fled and then tried to make the old rules of cruelty apply. They did not. Sansa ended the game in a room where his voice finally failed. Winterfell opened its old heart. Fires were lit, names were spoken. The wolf banner climbed the wall that had waited. Jon walked the halls and touched stone, as if visiting a friend who had survived a long illness. When the North gathered, voices rose like a forest in wind. The old words found a new mouth as the lords called him king in the North. He took the name without joy or vanity, only with the understanding that crowns in the North are more like cloaks, warm, heavy, and woven from duty. He looked beyond celebration to the cold fact that the true enemy did not care about songs. Dragonglass, obsidian, could kill White Walkers. Valyrian steel could too, but not enough swords existed to trust steel alone. Sam's raven from Old Town brought patient light. There were mountains of dragonglass beneath Dragonstone. Jon decided to sail, to ask Daenerys Targaryen for stone and space, and to spend courtesy like coin until cooperation could be forged. The voyage south felt like traveling through seasons in reverse. Salt replaced pine, gulls replaced ravens. Dragonstone rose black from the sea, carved by old fires, its cliffs shaped like scales. Missandei greeted them with a grace that turned protocol into welcome. Tyrion met Jon with a memory of earlier roads and a hand steady with pragmatism. The Queen received him in a hall built to impress, and the first words between them were edges wrapped in politeness. Daenerys was a storm contained within patience. She wanted fealty first, purpose second. Jon offered purpose first, truth as ballast, and fealty to the living rather than to distant thrones. The room chilled with the weight of that refusal. Yet interest moved behind her eyes where insult might have lived. She had seen cities burn and chains fall. She had also learned when a harder path leads to better ground. Conversations became a slow bridge. Tyrion served as stone setter, placing ideas where feet could step. Davos spoke plain, his honesty a knife that cut cleanly without twisting. Jon walked the caves beneath the castle and showed Daenerys drawings older than any crown, spirals and figures, warnings carved by hands long gone. The images told one story. The living had faced night before, together. When ravens began to speak of Eastwatch and moving dead, cooperation replaced debate. Daenerys allowed mining, granted ships, and walked the shore with Jon as if measuring the tide of a future none of them could fully see. Respect settled first. Something warmer kindled later, shy as a candle lit in a quiet room. Neither reached for it yet. The wind between them remained busy with larger errands. Cersei called a parley in King's Landing, and to earn even the pretense of truce, Jon chose a foolish, brave errand. Bring a single white, a reanimated corpse, to prove the war's shape. He gathered a ragged brotherhood of purpose, the Hound with his scars and truth, Beric with his fire and borrowed days, Jorah with his old loyalty scrubbed clean by suffering, and others who had no reason to trust and did so anyway. They went north into snow that learned their names as it fell. Hard ground taught old lessons again. Patience saved lives. Pride lost them. Thoros died with a prayer in his beard. The lake cracked and then froze into a ring of imprisonment. Ravens ran from Winterfell to Dragonstone, and Daenerys flew on a tide of decision rather than counsel. She arrived like summer in the middle of a storm. Fire made a road where none existed. The men ran. The dead followed, obedient as a tide. The Night King lifted his arm and threw a spear with geometries that did not require heat. A dragon fell, and the air shook as if grief had weight. Ice accepted the body without comment. The men reached the cliffs and clung there like barnacles learning to breathe. Benjen Stark appeared with the suddenness of mercy and brought Jon's escape with a final wordless gift. By the time the ship's lanterns found him, Jon's skin had the chalk of death, and his breath the small stubbornness of life. Grief struck Daenerys with a silence that was almost reverence. Jon, pulled from black water and given back to breath by his uncle's last ride, understood that her loss was a vow now, not a wound only. They sailed to King's Landing and opened a box of truth before a queen who called lies by sweeter names. The White leaped, snarled, and kept snarling after being cut, until fire and dragonglass ended it. For a moment, even politics watched. Cersei nodded, promised, and planned treachery 3 steps deep. Jaime left her at last, a man who finally believed his word should weigh more than his fear. Jon refused to swear neutrality while already pledged to Daenerys, and the refusal cost leverage and gained trust. On the journey north, the sea rocked the ship, and the hard line between strategy and affection blurred. 2 people who had chosen duty until it emptied them chose warmth, briefly, as if the world might permit it. Winterfell prepared. Sansa kept the hall steady, measured food, set guards, and read the faces of men who thought too much of themselves. Arya returned like a knife that had traveled far to learn patience. Littlefinger spun webs and stepped proudly into them. When the trap closed, it was quiet and complete. The sisters stood together, and the old keep breathed easier. At Winterfell, Bran and Sam laid lineage on the table like a careful map. Rhaegar Targaryen had not stolen Lyanna Stark. He had married her. Jon was not a bastard. He was Aegon, legitimate son and heir by strict lines that meant nothing to ice and everything to crowns. The truth carried no triumph. It carried a new weight. Jon heard it not as a drumbeat to march behind, but as a bell to be acknowledged and left to ring by itself, for now. The army of the dead arrived without music. The sky lowered. The air held its breath. Fires lined the trench like stitched light. The Unsullied stood first because they always had. The Dothraki rode into dark carrying flames that winked out like a field of candles pinched by an unseen hand. Dragons rose, blew heat, and disappeared into a storm that obeyed another master. The living held lines, then fell back, then held again. Strategy shrank to the size of a doorway or a staircase. Jon fought where he could find ground. He shouted until his voice rasped. He learned the limits of fire when the storm refused to let it speak. In the Godswood, Theon redeemed old ruin with new courage and stood where a boy once played. Melisandre's hands shook, and light still lived in them. Arya moved like a thought no one could catch, and in a moment that felt both impossible and inevitable, she ended the Night King with a blade that had traveled far to find the right hand. Silence arrived as if the world remembered a long rule and then set it down. The dead collapsed not as defeat, but as release. Dawn did not rush. It unfolded carefully over faces turned to ash and to sky. The field became a ledger. Names were counted, pyres were built. Jon spoke for the fallen and asked the living to carry their courage forward, without wasting it on rage that had nowhere honest to go. In the days that followed, grief and repair braided together. The halls filled with the work of survival, mending walls, sorting grain, stacking arrows, remembering how to laugh without apology. Daenerys stood at a northern table and learned the names of men who measured power without thrones. Sansa watched her with the wary intelligence of someone who has outlived too many promises. The room held two different temperatures and did not crack. It simply ached. Jon tried to be bridge and blade at once. He urged alliance with the same calm he used to assign shifts on the wall walk. He listened to Gendry's awkward smile and gave him a name where he had none. He watched Tormund joke through a new emptiness and decided the free folk would be happier beyond the wall when spring came. He sent Ghost with them later, choosing the kindness of a proper life over the comfort of keeping. War had not ended. It had only changed maps. Daenerys looked south and saw a city that had mocked her kindness and murdered her family. Cersei tightened her fist and called it governance. The north looked at the south and saw a furnace that burnt men into ash and called it glory. Jon looked at Daenerys and saw a woman sharpened by loss and still trying to choose mercy where she could find it. He also saw the strain in her eyes when mercy asked too much. Before marching, they held a feast that tasted of ashes and relief. Tormund lifted cups, and people pretended to be only glad. Daenerys named Gendry Lord of Storm's End, a gift that felt like a rope thrown to a man who had fallen and learned to climb. Jon stood and was praised until he wanted to sit again. The room's attention shifted in a way no words could fix. Love makes a crown heavier. Envy adds lead to it. In a quiet room later, Jon told Daenerys the truth about his name because lies ruin bridges. The truth scared her because it carried a shadow, a claim others might raise on his behalf whether he wanted it or not. He promised silence, then told his family, because family is where silence goes to die. Sansa carried the truth as if it were a seed. Seeds sprout where they can. Ships left White Harbor. Dragons flew ahead like living storms. Somewhere between Winterfell and King's Landing, the story thinned into roads and wind. Losses came like thrown stones. Missandei taken. Rhaegal struck from the sky by bolts that wrote efficient cruelty. Advisors arguing over maps and mercy. Jon stayed steady because steadiness is a language soldiers understand. He kept his oath in sight. Protect the living. That oath would require one last, hardest decision soon. But not yet. Not here. For now, the North mended as best it could, and the alliance bent without quite breaking. Jon walked ramparts with men who had once called him empty names and now called him by his own. He rode out to small villages and reminded them that winter was a season, not a rule. He touched the stone of Winterfell and felt it answer with the same old patience. He looked south and felt the road gathering itself beneath his feet. As you settle, remember this season of return and war not as noise, but as the steady work that followed a miracle. A man came back from death and did not grab at crowns. He took a broken house and stood it upright. He crossed sea and pride to ask for help. He faced night and kept a promise. He loved carefully and spoke truth even when it stripped him of ease. The war was not done. The map still argued, but mourning had proved possible, and for a little while the North breathed. In the hush after battle, even the ravens seemed kinder, and hearth smoke wrote patience against a slowly clearing sky. Chapter 6. The final choice. Morning after the long night felt like a breath returned rather than a triumph. Winterfell lit its fires, mended doors, and learned again how to speak at full voice. Jon thanked the living by working among them, steadying ladders, resetting watch rotations, listening more than talking. The dead were honored with wood and prayer, each pyre arranged with a care that promised memory. In that quiet, a promise formed. If morning could arrive once, people could build toward it again, patiently, plank by plank, with kindness practiced until it felt like weather. He learned to sit with silence that was not absence but rest. People brought bread and stories to one another. The castle remembered how to be a home and not a fortress alone at last. War, however, is a tide that finds every shoreline. Ravens brought news with the dry clatter of shells. Euron's fleet sharpened the sea. Rhaegal fell to bolts that split air like judgment. Missandei died on a wall high enough for cruelty to see itself. In council, compassion argued with timing. Tyrion urged a narrow mercy, Varys a colder caution. Grey Worm polished purpose. Daenerys stared at distance as if distance had betrayed her. Jon stood between loyalties that would not share a single road. He pledged himself again, not to crowns, but to the living. He asked Daenerys for patience, for trust that the North's rough love might yet become allegiance. He told her the truth he had promised to hide, and watched the truth widen the room. Names can be doors. His opened too many halls. Sansa guarded the North's safety with a wolf's caution. Arya guarded Jon with a blade's honesty. Varys wrote by candlelight. Tyrion kept trying to knit torn cloth with careful words and loyal regret. They sailed south under a sky that looked untroubled and wasn't. Dragonstone rose dark from the sea, all angles and old fire. In the throne room carved by volcanic hands, words hardened. Daenerys wanted fealty to anchor purpose. Jon offered purpose to anchor trust. He showed her caves painted by vanished hands, spirals and stick figures warning with a language older than thrones. For an hour the rock itself seemed to argue for alliance. Then ravens found them again, bringing maps inked in blood. At the city, mercy was given a bell. Ring it, Tyrion begged, and let surrender become a bridge. The plan felt human, almost tender in a season that had very little tenderness left. The day came hot and bright. The Golden Company posed like a painting. A dragon burned the painting to ash. Lannister men dropped blades. Bells began to carry through streets where people crouched, waiting to live. Jon breathed once, believing restraint could travel farther than rage if given the road. The bells rang, and a different sound rose beneath them. Grief spoke through flame. Daenerys turned the dragon and wrote fire along the streets, not in lines of battle, but in circles of punishment. Roofs exploded, stones glowed, air bruised the lungs. Jon pushed his men back from the killing of the surrendered, and called names until heads lifted. He led who would follow into alleys where the wind ran strange and small hands reached from doorways as if air itself had teeth. Grey Worm's spear answered with certainty more than anger. Surrender to him was a lie taught by slavers. He finished every sentence he started. Jon saw a city drown in light and could not call it victory. He moved like a shepherd in a storm without sheepdogs, guiding, restraining, failing, guiding again. Arya later would speak of ash that moved as if it were alive. In the moment, Jon learned that fire is a language many can speak and few can control once it starts. When the dragon flew on and the square exhaled smoke, Tyrion found Jon among broken arches. "My queen," he said, and the words finally sounded like a prayer for the dead. Night lowered, not to comfort, only to mute the edges. Jon sat alone with Longclaw and felt the sword become a question. Love had asked much of him. Duty now asked more, and neither gave him a mark to follow that would not wound the other. At dawn, the city's face sharpened. Tyrion freed his brother and surrendered himself to consequence. Jon met Grey Worm at a crossroad where bound men knelt with their eyes to the dust. The commander raised his hand. Jon took his arm and said, "Not after the bells." The arm did not lower. Soldiers chose sides with their breathing. Davos stepped between fury and iron and did what old sailors do. He stalled the storm. Jon walked away because the choice would not be made there. He sought counsel where counsel could still tell the truth without performance. Davos said, "Save lives now, debate justice later." Arya said, "Eyes do not forget the lessons they prefer." Sansa's raven said, "Trust yourself when fear learns flattery." None of it told Jon what to want. It did tell him what to refuse, a future that required burning every city that disagreed with the woman he loved. Refusal, however, is not yet a plan. Plans require doors. Tyrion waited in a cell that made inches matter. He did not defend himself. He did not blame Daenerys for wanting the world to stop breaking children. He blamed certainty for deciding who counted as a child. He asked Jon to weigh love on a bigger scale. "If you are the shield," he said, "your silence is a hole cut into it." Jon answered with the road Daenerys had walked, chains shattered, tyrants overturned, and Tyrion nodded, then asked whether good deeds should be a passport through any gate. Snow drifted through broken windows as if winter had traveled south to witness judgment. Jon climbed the long staircase to the ruined hall. Daenerys stood before the Iron Throne, not touching it, talking softly to a dream of better cities. She imagined a world remade, measured by freedom taught rather than begged. Jon stepped into that imagining and asked for one condition: mercy before fire. She gave him certainty before compromise. Together, she promised, meaning the world fixed by will. He kissed her because love is still love, even when standing on the wrong floor. He whispered loyalty because it was true. Then he chose because choices once asked. Do not leave the room politely. The blade entered quietly, without theater. She breathed out, surprised. In that breath lived all the roads they would not walk. Jon held her as if holding was still a tool that could mend. The throne looked smaller as she fell. Drogon arrived and sang grief that did not need translation. The dragon did not kill the man who killed his mother. He melted the argument they had fought around, a chair made from other arguments, until it ran like regret. Then he lifted Daenerys and flew into a sky that kept its answers. Jon let the gods take him. He did not run and did not defend. The room closed, then the hour, then the day. Outside, people counted, found water, named the lost, began again because people always do. Two armies held a city that had no appetite left for marching. The unsullied demanded justice as arithmetic. The North and the Vale demanded their brother back. The free folk waited at walls because walls still controlled food. A council gathered in the yard scorched by dragons, the ground honest in its scars. Tyrion, unshackled only to speak, offered a tale about tales, how crowns last when they serve the story more than the bearer, how the best story for rebuilding is the one that asks least of pride. He named Bran the Broken, memory made into a seat. The name traveled like a cautious bird from face to face. Sansa asked the price and paid it for the North, freedom to govern winter by winter's rules. The others agreed because arguments had run out of food. Grey Worm accepted a compromise written like a truce. Jon would not die, yet neither would he stay in rooms where his name could move armies. He would return to the Night's Watch, no longer a wall against men, but a practice for the troubled. Goodbyes were delivered carefully, like fragile things wrapped in thick cloth. Sansa touched Jon's cheek and said the North would keep its promise to him by keeping itself. Arya held him hard and told him to live the way she had learned to, with questions that open, not close. Bran looked past him and, with the odd gentleness of a seer, sent him where the path he recognized still ran. Tyrion walked beside Jon one last time and apologized for being human. Jon forgave him for the same reason. Outside the city, ships slid toward warmer work. Grey Worm's gaze held no forgiveness and no vacancy, only completion. Jon thanked him anyway for discipline in a world that needed fences as it relearned doors. He rode north beneath a sky that for the first time in months had no dragons in it. The black cloak, when it settled on his shoulders again, felt like admitting what had always been true. He was most himself when standing where morning needed a guard. On the road north, the miles moved through him like weather, sun and shade, wind and hush. He let memory come without staging it as trial or theatre. He remembered Mansa's laugh, Gren's vow, Ygritte's stubborn joy, the quiet counsel of Maester Aemon, the smoke in Davos's voice when he spoke of simple decency. He let himself also remember the faces of strangers saved by small choices. A boy lifted onto a cart, a girl given water, a mother finding her child in a doorway. A man can live with sorrow if he carries it honestly and lets it sit beside gratitude. He promised himself to practice that kind of carrying, to let the weight make him careful rather than cruel. Ahead the gift waited like a field after frost, stiff at dawn, forgiving by noon. Castle Black received him without ceremony. The ravens acknowledged nothing but the message. The yard took his weight the way an old chair does. He slept in a room that remembered him. Ollie's absence was a quiet that declined to sit at the table. Men nodded not to a king, not to a ghost, but to a brother who had returned with more winters in his eyes than hair on his head. Respect met him where ceremony did not. The kitchen sent him stew, the armory sent him work, the rookery sent him the sound of wings at dawn, and he thanked each without asking for more. He walked the familiar walls and discovered what had changed, not the stones, but the reason for them. The watch, once a shield against men, was now a school for restraint. He set duties that kept hands busy and tempers aired, paired rivals at chores so work could sand grievance down. He sent a mason to help a free folk camp raise a hall and posted a ranger there to drink tea, not to draw steel. He learned the names of dogs and children before the names of their fathers, which proved wiser. Ghost came limping and proud, scarred and whole. Jon knelt and pressed his forehead to the great white skull and felt, as he had always felt, the uncomplicated truth of companionship that asks for nothing but presence. Tormund arrived with laughter designed to keep sorrow from eating the corners of a day. The free folk looked north and saw possibility, rather than exile. Home, someone said, and the word fit. Spring sent its scouts. Snow withdrew first from stone, then from furrows, then from the idea of permanence. The gate opened not for an army but for families moving like a river that has decided to resume its work. Jon walked with them into the trees, ghost a pale punctuation along the margin. They traveled without ceremony and carried more tools than flags. The land ahead did not belong to anyone because it belonged to itself. At night, fires stitched constellations lower to the ground. Jon sat with a knife and a stick and shaved curl after curl from wood, not to make anything, just to let his hands keep time with a heart finding a quieter meter. He let his grief be a weather system that would pass, return, and pass again. He did not argue with it into shape. He fed it small patience and asked it to leave other people's mornings alone. Letters reached him by luck. Sansa wrote of harvests and stubborn lords learning that winter writes the minutes. Arya sent drawings of birds that have no names in the north. Tyrion enclosed bad jokes improved by his handwriting. Jon answered when he could, with news of small hunts and repairs, of a girl who learned to track and a boy who learned to listen, of Ghost chasing a hare larger than a saddle and returning pleased with the conversation. Once on a hill above a valley that used to be a rumor, Jon looked south until distance erased anger and left only care. He thought of vows and understood them as shapes that adapt without losing their center. Protect the realms of men had never been about lines on maps. It had always been about making space for tomorrow. He stood a while, thinking nothing, and in that nothing felt the cleanest loyalty he had ever known. The free folk built slowly, as if listening for the ground's opinion before digging. Children learned to read snow as text. Elders taught without claiming the future. Jon helped, then stepped back, then helped again, savoring the rhythm of usefulness that required neither banners nor speeches. The throne was gone, the story narrowed, and in that narrowing he found room to breathe. If you need an image to rest on, take this. A quiet glade where the trees lean in like kindly elders, a man and his wolf walking at a pace chosen for noticing, breath-making soft fog that disappears without apology. The final choice was not one moment. It was many moments shaped into a line. To love and refuse worship, to protect and refuse triumph, to accept judgment and refuse bitterness, to trade the loud room for the honest road. Snow comes and goes the way true things do. Footprints fill and fade. Tomorrow arrives undecorated and generous. Jon carries no crown and no map, only the habit of listening for trouble and the will to stand between it and those not made for standing. He chose the living. He keeps choosing them. Beyond the walls people build, and behind the doors they still open. And the world, handed back to morning, remembers how to breathe. Jon's tale is one of circles. Beginnings that return in endings, loss that returns in love, and exile that becomes a kind of freedom. In the stillness of the far north, he finds a place where duty no longer burns against the heart. The snow falls quietly, the woods stretch on without end, and Jon disappears into them, at peace at last. As you rest now, let his story settle like snow on stone. Soft, unhurried, inevitable. A life shaped by choices, carried by silence, and finally, set free.